I'm going to jump to the geopolitics, which is the fifth, and I'm going to come back to the technology piece. So I've talked about the rise of the emerging markets, the economic power shift. This is 1,000 times bigger. That force in itself will shake everyone through the system. If we then go to I'm going to jump to the fifth one at the other end, it's the return of geopolitics, which to me is volatility. It's a driver of volatility in what's happening. And what we're seeing is that there is a challenge we have, not only in terms of countries that are having more tension with each other. If you think about the Ukraine, what's happening, or you think about what's happening in the Middle East, if we think about what's happening in parts of northern Latin America, if we think about the South China Sea, if we think about tensions between Japan and China and North Korea, we could go on. There's a lot of that. And what we have to be careful about, I think, is I don't think anyone wants to have a war, but what we should always remember is sometimes some of our biggest conflicts have happened because of a mistake. You know, the World War I, no one wanted to go into war, but it was a series of mistakes that ended up with the world leading that way. So it's something we need to be thinking about as we go through it. The power of disruptive technologies. This is a change that is, I think, going to be as disruptive as we're seeing with the re-rise of Asia. What we're seeing here basically is a huge set of innovation going on in technology. This is mobile commerce, this is 3D printing, this is the Internet of Things, this is the robotics and automation of knowledge that we're seeing. There are a huge number of changes that are underway on the technology front that's affecting everyone. And to give you an example, if you think about computing power, which is one of the biggest drivers of this, the average washing machine, you know, the higher washing machine, has more computing power in it than what NASA had to send a man to the moon in 1969. So that washing machine has more computing power than all of NASA had to guide a rocket to the moon and land someone there, let alone what a smartphone actually does. The second big driver of what's happening with technology is data. We are collecting today more data every day than we have in the last 2,000 years combined. Now the problem is most of that data is useless, right? It doesn't matter. But 5% of that data is very useful in terms of what we do. So what we have to think about is how we manage data. I would argue that the leading data thinkers in the world are basically, the leading data thinkers in the world are actually in China and in Shenzhen. It's not in the Silicon Valley. And that's because what we have basically is people like Alibaba and Tencent who are very good at taking all of that data that they're getting from e-commerce and being able to create businesses out of it and drive performance. So what I would say is the data side plus the computing power is a big driver of the shift. And the third force of technology is more and more people have access to that computing power and data, right? So we're going to move from a world that has, 2 billion people to 4 billion people that are connected. And those three factors, again, incredible improvements in computing power. The second is the data, creating huge amounts of data. And the third, being connected, is leading to disruption for many businesses. And one of the things that every single CEO that I meet, whether you're in the mining industry or the retail industry, what they worry about is digitization and technology and how that changes things. I was mentioning some of the disruptive technologies. These are what we think are the dozen disruptors that are out there. I'm not going to go through each one of those. I do want to talk a little bit about how it affects different businesses, as I said, in different organizations. In healthcare, we think the data increase will be about 50 times larger. I don't know how many people here have some sort of device that measures their energy usage, or you put up your hand if you have one. Say, it's about 25% of people having that. The data that we start to collect on you and how you live, how you breathe, what sort of your energy consumption is going to have a huge impact on how we do healthcare technology shifts. Agriculture, many people think agriculture is a backward business. Farmers are there. That is a very wrong way to look at it. I was just in Vancouver on Sunday meeting with some farmers, dairy farmers, and you would not believe the technology that's put on a cow. These are like iPads, and they can measure whether a cow is chewing its cud or not. They can measure the enzymes and check whether it's beginning to get sick or not. They can tell whether the cow is stressed or not. And the farmers have iPads now where they can monitor their herd, right? And so you'd see a very different world. So it's affecting many, many different businesses. GE is a company that I think is a very interesting example of how they've embraced technology. They're a classic industrial company, right? They're focused on operations, manufacturing, metal, materials, and so forth. And they've made a big shift to say we're going to go to more of the software side of things. And one example I like to use is actually in a locomotive. When you make a locomotive and you sell a locomotive, it used to be that you focused on the power of that locomotive, how much fuel it used, what its pickup speed or acceleration was, how strong the metals were. That's what a lot of people spent time focusing on. It turns out that value with a locomotive is much more focused on how often you use the locomotive. That's the biggest driver of performance. And so one way you measure the value of a locomotive is what's its average speed per day. And the average speed of a locomotive in the United States today is about 22 miles an hour, right? About 50 kilometers an hour a day. 24 hours a day, that's its average speed. If you were able to increase the speed, average speed or use of the locomotive by 1 mile an hour, if you were one of the 3 largest US railway companies, that would improve your annual bottom line by $250 million, right? It's a huge impact on the performance of a railroad company. So how you deal with congestion in a rail yard, how you think about preventative maintenance, these are analytics, it's data that's actually much more important than the metal or the hardware. And this is why GE has made the shift to say, we're not going to lose that business to a startup. We're going to create that business for us, and we have the engineers to do it. So you see a lot of industrial companies that are very aggressively going into the data analytics side. This isn't just about retail and media and e-commerce. It's also industrial companies that use this. I'm going to, for the sake of time, jump through some of these, but I hope I've given you a bit of a picture of, we've had the re-rise of Asia, the 2.2 billion, that economic power shift, the technology change, which is just accelerating. It's going faster and faster. Larry Summers would say we're at chapter 1 of a 100-chapter book on technology. We're early days, but it's going faster and faster.